I'm sure many of you have been to different visits to a funeral home. And one thing I've noticed, and I've confirmed this in talking with brother priests, when the deceased was a person of faith, or the family is a family of faith, the atmosphere in the room is different. Yeah. This wasn't just my first funeral experience. I have seen it. You walk in and there's a kind of lightness, there's sadness, a sadness of separation, but it's very different. And St. Paul expresses this in his first letter to the Thessalonians. He says, "We would not have you ignorant concerning those who are asleep, brethren, brothers and sisters, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope." He's telling the Thessalonians, it's okay to grieve. There is a pain of separation. There's no question. It's okay to grieve. But there is hope. Hope in a future that really does exist. A future that is grounded in the fact that Jesus, a historical person, rose from the dead, a historical event. It's extremely important as something that is transformative for our human existence. From the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there is also an important mention which helps us to understand that our hope is not a passive hope. It's not as though we're just waiting. There is an active dimension that those of us who are left behind can still be involved in. We can participate actively and contribute to the hope of the deceased. The Catechism says, "All who die in God's grace and friendship, but still imperfectly purified, are indeed assured of their eternal salvation. But after death, they undergo purification, so as to achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven." This is the Church's answer to the classic question, what happens if you die and you weren't a bad person, but you weren't perfect either? What side of the coin do you fall on? And the answer of the Church is heaven. The good news is it's heaven. But since heaven is a place of perfect holiness, there does need to be a time of purification afterwards. It's kind of normal. I remember hearing an analogy of this, that it was a bit like joining a sports team, you know? If you want to play hockey, kid wants to play hockey, and the team is having the tryouts in the fall, well, you may practice before the tryouts in order to have the best possible chance of getting on the team. And so if you've done that, the coach will say, okay, you're on the team. If you've done it, but, you know, sometimes you slacked off, you might not be in the greatest shape, the coach may say, well, you're on the team, but you're going to have to sit on the bench for a bit while we train you up. But you're still on the team. The only people who aren't on the team are those who don't show up for the tryouts. But those who really want that, they have an opportunity. So this reality that's mentioned in the Catechism, we give it the title in our Catholic tradition, purgatory. But it's a good thing. It's part of heaven. And what an amazing thing about purgatory is that those who are experiencing it can be assisted by those of us who are still walking around on this earth. We're still in communion with them. That is why I have labeled this slide our active hope, because we can be part of an activity, a process, and contribute to the hope of those who have gone on before. This fact structures our Catholic funeral rites a great deal. Our Catholic funeral rites are not simply about saying goodbye and looking to the past. It's also turning towards the future with hope, and beyond that, they're designed to actively contribute to the full salvation of the deceased. We get the privilege of being a part of that process. Now, as we consider the reality of death, the moment of death, we have to, at some point, consider our own. St. Paul says, oh, you know, it's better to die and be with Christ. And I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing, but just in case we're a little more hesitant than he is, there is a process of learning to address this that is good for us. Ideally, while we're alive, We should prepare for our own passing, for our own death. This could mean having a will. I know some people who put off having a will because they just don't want to think about it. It's not really healthy. It's not really Christian. The idea is you're preparing for a journey. If you're about to go on a trip, you don't say to yourself, well, I really don't want to think about packing the bags. No, you get ready for every stage of that trip. So that's what preparing a will is. Planning our own funeral, thinking about the arrangements. The lady who wanted 3 copies of that pamphlet, she was already in that mode. In fact, she was getting other people ready for her funeral. I thought that was great. I thought that was actually very healthy. St. Ambrose, the Archbishop of Milan, the bishop at the time who helped convert St. Augustine, he wrote, "The Lord allowed death to enter the world so that sin might come to an end. Death, in this context, is a Passover to be made by all mankind. You must keep facing it with perseverance. The word death must not trouble us. The blessings that come from a safe journey should bring us joy." It's like going on a trip. It's like going on a journey. That's what St. Ambrose is saying. In another passage, which I didn't put up on the screen, I don't have it on a slide, but he mentions that, imagine if there was no death. Imagine if we lived in a world of sin and there was no death. You know, there was no limit to the extent to which suffering could continue. Goodness, that would actually be worse. That would be worse. So this text that he wrote is actually, it's called a treatise on death as a blessing. That's a powerful way of considering the reality of death.